Today's discussion will be presented in three sections since we're recording this session for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Feel free to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to get them answered online. We're particularly pleased to welcome our moderator, Tom Temin, the host of the Federal Drive on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Let me turn over the reins to Tom to begin today's discussion.
Welcome and thanks for joining us. Our guests today are Stephen Hernandez, the Chief Information Security Officer for the Office of Inspector General at Health and Human Services. Harry Lee is the Deputy CIO at the Census Bureau. Walter Harris is the Chief Operating Officer at the FDA. Raj Rana is the Senior Systems Engineering Manager for Partner Ecosystem at NetApp. And Darren House, the Chief Technology Officer at Microtech. He's also the former Director of Technology Solutions for Avnet Government Solutions. Great to have you all. And let's get right into it. This cloud issue is, no pun intended, billowing out across the federal government. And lately, the idea has come to the fore about the idea of hybrid cloud. You've got federal clouds, you've got commercial clouds, you've got agency-owned clouds. And so the issue becomes, how do you protect data in all of those locations? I guess I'd like to kind of go down the line maybe to begin with and just give us what you see as best practices, strategies for protecting especially data. We're concentrating on data today as opposed to applications, even though they're connected in some way. But protecting data in the hybrid situation. Stephen, why don't we start with you?
Sure, Tom. So something that's interesting about the hybrid situation is you're going to be working with a couple different standards and approaches to information security. On the true cloud side, the public cloud, you're going to be dealing with FedRAMP, and FedRAMP's going to set out that baseline for security. And hopefully, as an agency, you've gone out and said, we need a little bit extra in these areas, and you've tailored that FedRAMP approach, and you're feeling pretty comfortable there. Back at the agency side, where you might have on-premise cloud or private cloud, well, you don't necessarily have to do FedRAMP, but you still have to meet NIST Special Publication 853 Rev 4. So you're working with two different standards, and the goal here is to make sure that as these services are working together and coming together, that you have a homogeneous view of risk. So CDM, Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation, is one of the cornerstones of those practices. On-prem, that's very easy to do. A lot of agencies are excelling in that area. In cloud, it's in process. We're not quite there yet. And so as we start to look at data and how we protect data and where our data lives, we have to ask ourselves, how much risk visibility do I need? And where does it make sense to put it? In a cloud outside where, you know what, I may not have perfect visibility, but the pricing and performance and whatnot makes sense, or this data is so critical to my operation, I need near continuous visibility into that risk. I'm going to put it here until the public sector can catch up on the monitoring.
All right, so a little bit of misalignment at visibility into the environment when it's yours or when it's someone else's. Harry, what about the Census Bureau?
Well, Stephen mentioned FedRAMP, which is, I guess, one of the key criteria for looking at any cloud service provider. What we've done also, we've looked at additional risk controls. We have a risk management framework at Census, so it's all about really the security and the risk of that data. We are putting in a hybrid cloud framework at Census, as I've mentioned in previous interviews. So different things about the data. One, we do have title data, very need for great protection, which will probably remain in a private cloud, either on-prem or a private cloud probably a dedicated private cloud at a cloud service provider. Even when it is on-prem or at a cloud service provider, we look at a couple different things, both logical and physical access controls, the authorization, authentication of an individual, encryption of that data at rest and in motion, also physical controls, the ability to lock servers and storage and networking cabinets and things like that. So really it comes down to the risk of the data. If it's a public-facing application where you can present information versus the data, then that's probably better for a public cloud type of environment.
All right, and Walter, at the FDA, there's a lot of data, a lot of corporate data, a lot of secret data, testing data. I mean, I think of you as a pretty data-intensive agency. And so how are you handling all of this?
Well, that's right, Tom. We are staying in concert with the FedRAMP certification process, which is critical to any CSP that comes to FDA. But you're correct that we have a task to try to protect our employees, but more importantly, we have a task to protect trade secret information that comes to us. Our challenge for keeping our infrastructure secure is a monumental one. And so it's very important that we consider all those parts and pieces before we move forward with something like that. I think what we're looking at now is we're trying to do our cloud strategies in three parts. One, we want to have a private cloud that operates within FDA. Then we want to have what we call a public-private cloud that allows us to have seamless operations and interactions with our industry partners that we regulate. And then, of course, we want to have a public cloud that has commonly understood data that we give to the public all the time. Juggling those three balls is kind of a Herculean task. But I think, working with folks on this panel and others to try to figure out better strategies, and it is about the risk. How much do we do? So this is why we have that kind of hybrid approach to doing our cloud strategy at FDA.
All right, so I want to ask Raj Rana of NetApp. It sounds like agencies are coming into the idea that you can't have 100%, or you really don't want to bother with 100% absolute encrypted security for every last bit of data, but more the risk management approach and to have some sensible way to get at this.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of the comments that have been shared here by panelists are frankly comments that even resonate even in the commercial industry. There's no one size fits all. While there's a lot of work that's being done by what we call the hyperscalers, the folks like the Amazon Web Services, the Microsoft Azures, and the like. There's a lot of innovation and money that these folks are pouring into their clouds to address a lot of these challenges. But the challenges still remain, right? There's every agency has their unique approach towards how they want towards their data, and as well as how they want to manage it, how they want to measure it, things like that. So as you start to, but on the other side, what you have is this pull towards the benefits of the elasticity and the economics that the public cloud provides. That's pulling you towards that. So what's occurring is, frankly, this disaggregation, right? This data disaggregation, where now what you've created is, instead of having silos inside of your data center, you've got silos that exist outside of your data center. So I've got some data that exists here, some off-prem, some on-prem, some in other locations, and off-prem may be multiple different clouds. So, so our approach is recognizing the fact that not only just the encryption is important, not only just the physical protection of the data, but also to be able to say that I need to protect the data, but I also need to ensure that it's available to my users in order to ensure that the value of that data is being unlocked. So this concept of a data fabric, the concept of regardless of where your data exists or where it lies, you should still be able to protect it according to the requirements of your agency, but still allow your users, your end users, whether they're your actual employees or whether they're partners that you're working with, allow them the ability to unlock the value.
All right, so that data fabric idea implies movement of data.
Exactly.
Among these different facilities. And Darren House, so how do you make sure that the data fabric doesn't become a flying carpet that makes off with your data?
That's a very good question, Tom. Thank you for that one. Well, let's start out with the basics. And I think the basics here are, for anything, you need to categorize and prioritize your data. You need to understand what that data is so you can have a perspective on that value of the data. And once you have that perspective, you can identify policies that you can apply to the data to know this data is more sensitive to something and this data is less sensitive. So you get those policies in place for that. Having that gives you this ability to use a standardized fabric or standardized management interface to be able to control and handle that data across clouds. One example, so anybody who's going to try and attack your data, generally speaking, they're going to go through an application to try and hack the application to get to the data. It's interesting that CERT just announced something last month that said that 85% of all cyber attacks could be mitigated by patching known holes in applications and operating systems. Just that one thing alone, all of a sudden 85% of your cyber attacks are taken care of. That's a pretty good data strategy, I think.
Yeah, so Stephen, that gets back to what you said about the importance of continuous monitoring and mitigation, continuous diagnostics and moderation, and also continuous monitoring, two different things related. But that would seem to be kind of a major requirement to get to data security.
Absolutely.
Via the application.
Yeah, absolutely. And the application security is very tough because, in the traditional waterfall model of development, we went through a lot of development, hurry, scurry, and then, it's done. And then let all those contractors go. They're really expensive. And the problem is that the legacy libraries and the legacy architecture that's built on, researchers are constantly looking for holes and vulnerabilities in those areas. But one thing that we're looking at is, maybe we don't have to put so much effort into re-skinning that application application or reworking that application, what can we do at the data layer to provide more protection? And at what point can we take that little bit of data and put a little, suit of armor around it so that even if it's in a kludgy app, or even if, it gets outside of its known zone of comfort, that there's some kind of protection?
Yeah, that idea of getting away from hard and prickly on the outside and soft on the inside, which has always been the knock against the way cybersecurity is conducted, but getting encryption down to the data layer into the data element. Harry, does Census look at it that way?
We're looking at multiple ways to protect and secure access to data. I mentioned before the need to authenticate and authorize. It's not just a user, but between applications and between systems and back to the data. The data itself to be encrypted both in motion and at rest, like I mentioned before. So really multiple layers of security are required, I think, in this day. One of the things that you have, your legacy apps really weren't designed to be cloud ready. So one of the things we're looking at is putting design patterns in place to help us as we develop new apps, but also looking at those apps that we want to make cloud ready, going back and re-engineering or refactoring or reskinning, I think you said? Reskinning. Those apps. So yeah, there's just a lot of ways to look at protecting the data, and an application is part of that as well.
Yeah, so Walter, what's your approach? You mentioned there's going to be a FDA cloud, then a public cloud, and then kind of a hybrid in between three different styles of cloud. And so what does that mean for data storage and how you protect it? Do you put a suit of armor around every row and cell?
Well, first we have to really take a look at our real-life situation at FDA as it relates to data. Now, industry standard data that comes in, where it used to be, small packets of data, we're looking at terabytes of data now. So our infrastructure and security systems have to be able to accommodate all of that. Data at rest that's encrypted, some in transit that's encrypted. But what we don't want to do is have the walls so high that no one can ever climb over it in a good way. And so we need to decide how high the walls will be between moderate, high, and low. We have to educate our partners on the outside when they give us information that comes into FDA. They sometimes have to know where things are, and we can tell them some things and some things we can't tell them. But I think you brought up a good point earlier about the whole monitoring of the infrastructure, of the environment. That is the key. Getting out in front of it. We have lots of attempts on a regular basis, but we get out in front of those, and we're able to then apply resolutions down the line for future issues. So I think educating our industry partners is important. I think not having everything be extremely high-walled, understanding how to prioritize what the data that needs to be protected at certain levels need to be, are really the ways to get us to a commonly understood set of understanding about this issue.
All right, good. And that gets to what Raj said earlier a little bit about the idea of not only protection, but also availability and accessibility. And can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What are ways to make sure that the application, but also ultimately the user, is what applications are all about, has what they need?
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, because the not creating the wall, creating the walls as high as they need to be and no higher, if you will, right? Because there's obviously a fiduciary responsibility to protect the data. Yet, in the same token, you don't want to make it so difficult to access the data that the value and you shift that cost burden, if you will, to your employees, right? So that cost ends up getting shifted. So some of this is to be able to say, okay, now we need to increase our security perimeter. We need to increase the amount of the protection, if you will. I'm using the term generically, around the data that we have. But we also want to be able to move those. We also want to leverage the benefits of cloud computing. And so in some of these cases, is be able to say, if we are able to take the data and protect the data, but still leverage the benefits of called compute in the public cloud, in the government cloud, and things like that, you have an ability to really have the best of both worlds, where your data still has the moat, the shark, the et cetera, around it, right? The ill-tempered sea bass, all of that around them, but you still are allowing your employees to be able to access that. So effectively, you're making shifts on the back end from an IT perspective that really changes the entire way that your infrastructure is laid out. But it still provides a transparent view to your end users and allows them all the benefits that they're hearing about in the news all the time about continued innovation that's occurring. So it allows you to really balance both of those.
And Darren, do the cloud providers get that idea? In other words, that requires them to have a user-centric or customer-centric view of how they build out their infrastructures versus, I've got a scalable thing that I can operate.
Yeah, I think the cloud providers understand that at the end of the day, it's all about the data that an application provides to a user to get work done. And that's really what this is all about. This whole IT industry is about getting data to users through an application to actually get work done and make decisions. And the cloud service providers, they get that. They just have different requirements on the commercial side than on the public sector side. And it's that variance, I think, between the two that can cause some issues. But I think the key thing, and everybody's talked about the main issues here, and I agree with everything that everybody said. I think underlying all this stuff, though, is providing standard interfaces and structures between the enterprise side and the cloud service provider. If you can figure out a way to get that standards between the two, then you can apply your existing security model out into that cloud model, and everything becomes better.
Yeah, because you might have different architectures in different clouds, and you really have to, in effect, virtualize that for the user so that that single pane of glass or that one view is regardless of what the particular underlying infrastructure that you happen to be accessing actually looks like.
Yes.
All right, well, that's a good place to take a break. Our guests today are Stephen Hernandez, the Chief Information Security Officer for the Office of Inspector General at Health and Human Services. Walter Harris is the Chief Operating Officer at the FDA. Raj Rana is the Senior Systems Engineering Manager for Partner Ecosystems at NetApp. Darren House is the Chief Technology Officer at Microtech and the former Director of Technology Solutions at Avnet Government Solutions. And Harry Lee, the Deputy CIO at the Census Bureau. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This is the Data-Centric Approaches to Government in the Cloud, sponsored by Avnet Government Solutions and NetApp, here on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.